You saw the headlines, you heard the whispers in the corridors of power. The West is not just tightening the screws, it's preparing to fundamentally rewire the entire financial punishment being inflicted on the Kremlin. This isn't about another round of sanctions or strongly worded statements. This is about something far more profound, a move so audacious it could redraw the rules of economic statecraft for a generation. Today we are pulling back the curtain on a historic multi-billion-dollar gambit. We are going to dissect the West's plan to take Russia's own frozen wealth and turn it directly against the very war machine it was meant to fund. We will break down the mechanics of this financial judo, explore the staggering sums involved, and reveal the high-stakes geopolitical chess game unfolding from Washington to Brussels. You will understand not just what is happening, but why this moment is a critical turning point, and what it means for the future of Ukraine, for Russia, and for the global order itself. Stay until the end, because we will uncover the one major legal loophole that could make or break this entire plan, a detail most news reports are completely missing. For over 2 years, the West has frozen hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian state assets, central bank reserves, sovereign wealth funds, all locked away in financial institutions across Europe and beyond. It was a shocking, unprecedented move designed to cripple the Kremlin's ability to finance its war, but it was always a static punishment. The money was frozen, but just sitting there, a massive monument to Russia's isolation. That era is now over. The conversation has decisively shifted from freezing to seizing, or, to use the preferred term in diplomatic circles, repurposing. The United States and its European allies are now finalizing a plan to use those frozen assets as collateral for a massive interest-free loan to Ukraine. We are talking about a figure in the realm of 140 billion euros. Let that number sink in. This isn't foreign aid pulled from American or European taxpayers. This is in essence a financial tool being forged from Russian resources. Think of it as the ultimate you break it, you buy it policy, but on a geopolitical scale. The core idea is both simple and revolutionary. Since Russia has caused catastrophic damage to Ukraine, and since it shows no intention of stopping or paying for that damage, the international community will front the money for Ukraine's survival and reconstruction. They will do this by lending Ukraine an astronomical sum, using Russia's own frozen money as the guarantee for that loan. Ukraine gets the cash it desperately needs today to fight, to rebuild shattered cities, and to keep its economy from collapsing. The principle of the frozen Russian assets remains technically untouched, a bargaining chip for a future peace settlement. But the value, the financial power of those assets is being harnessed right now. It's a way to make Moscow pay for its aggression without waiting for a war crimes tribunal or a peace treaty that may be years away. Now you might be asking, how did we get here? How did the West move from hesitant sanctions to such a confrontational financial weapon? The journey has been a slow burn, a story of escalating brutality on the battlefield meeting escalating resolve in Western capitals. Initially, the very idea of touching these frozen assets was considered too radical, too legally risky. Central bank reserves have long been viewed as sacrosanct, protected by principles of sovereign immunity. But as Russian missiles continued to rain down on Ukrainian apartment blocks, schools, and energy infrastructure, the moral and political calculus began to change. The argument became irresistible. Why should Russia be allowed to keep its vast wealth parked safely in Western banks while it simultaneously attempts to obliterate a neighboring state? The sheer scale of the destruction in Ukraine, with costs for reconstruction already estimated in the hundreds of billions, made the frozen Russian funds look less like an abstract financial instrument and more like a potential solution. The key turning point was the realization that Ukraine is facing a financial cliff. The initial waves of Western financial aid are running out. The costs of a protracted war of attrition are staggering. Ammunition, drones, air defense systems, salaries for soldiers. It all consumes cash at a ferocious rate. Simultaneously, the country needs billions just for emergency repairs to its power grid and to house millions of displaced citizens. Western governments, facing their own domestic political pressures and budget constraints, knew that simply writing check after check from their own treasuries was not a sustainable long-term strategy. They needed a new, more durable source of funding, and their gaze inevitably fell on the one pile of money that was both large enough to make a difference and directly connected to the cause of the problem: the 210 billion euros of frozen Russian central bank assets sitting in Europe, primarily in Belgium. This is where the plan gets strategically brilliant. The West isn't just handing the money to Ukraine. That would be politically and legally explosive, labeled as outright theft. Instead, they are creating a complex financial structure. The frozen Russian assets will serve as collateral for a massive bond issue or a direct loan from major Western nations to Ukraine. This loan, reportedly up to 140 billion euros, would be issued at zero interest. For Ukraine, it's a lifeline of almost unimaginable proportions. It allows them to plan for a long war, to invest in advanced weapon systems, and to begin the monumental task of rebuilding without waiting for the fighting to stop. The genius of the structure is that the actual frozen assets don't move. They stay right where they are, but their existence enables this huge flow of capital to Kiev. The repayment mechanism is what makes this more than just a loan. The expectation, the built-in assumption of this entire scheme is that Russia will one day be forced to pay reparations for its war of aggression. When that day comes, whether through a future peace treaty or a post-war claims process, the money owed by Russia would be used to pay back this loan. In effect, the West is advancing Ukraine the reparations that everyone believes Russia will eventually owe. It aligns the financial incentive perfectly. The West gets its money back, Ukraine gets its reconstruction funded, and Russia is left with the bill for its destruction. It's a way of preemptively enforcing a reparations verdict. This isn't charity, it's a forced advance on a future debt, and it sends a chilling message to the Kremlin. Every bomb you drop, every city you shell is adding to a tab that you will be forced to pay, one way or another. But here is where we hit the first major point of contention, a legal and political fault line that runs straight through the heart of Europe. Not everyone is comfortable with this bold move. Some European capitals, nervous about the precedent and fearful of Russian retaliation, have been hesitant. They argue that seizing sovereign assets, even indirectly, could undermine trust in the euro as a global reserve currency. Why would other countries like China or Saudi Arabia want to keep their reserves in European banks if they fear those assets could one day be confiscated over a political dispute? This is a serious argument, one that has slowed down the process for months. The United States, which holds far fewer frozen Russian assets, has been a much more vocal proponent of the plan, pushing its European allies to be more aggressive. This internal Western debate is why the final shape of the plan involves a loan rather than an outright transfer. The loan structure is a political compromise, a way to assuage the fears of the more cautious European nations. It's seen as a legally safer path, a temporary use of the asset's value rather than a permanent confiscation. But make no mistake, from Moscow's perspective, it is still seen as theft. The Kremlin has already vowed a fierce response, promising legal challenges and retaliation that could come in the form of cyber attacks, energy cutoffs, or further military escalation. They are arguing that this move is a blatant violation of international law and the principle of sovereign immunity. So the stage is set for a monumental clash, not just on the battlefield, but in courtrooms and financial markets across the globe. And this is just the beginning. The real shock, the part that could fundamentally change how wars are paid for, is still to come. The hesitation from certain European capitals isn't just about legal nuance or economic theory. It's rooted in a very real, very tangible fear of crossing a line from which there is no return. For decades, the global financial system has operated on a set of unwritten rules. A core principle among them was the sanctity of sovereign state assets, especially central bank reserves. They were considered untouchable, the financial bedrock of a nation, immune from confiscation even during major diplomatic disputes. What the United States and its most willing allies are now proposing doesn't just bend this rule, it shatters it completely. They are arguing that in the case of a blatant, unprovoked war of aggression, these old rules no longer apply. A new precedent is being set in real time. If you invade your neighbor and attempt to erase it from the map, your money is no longer safe. Your financial sovereignty can be forfeit. This is the profound philosophical shift happening behind closed doors in Brussels. It's a move from a defensive financial posture to an offensive one. Sanctions were about denying Russia access to its own money and technology. This new step is about actively weaponizing that denied access. It transforms frozen assets from a symbolic penalty into an active tool of war finance just for the other side. And the message to Vladimir Putin is unequivocal. Your war chest is now our war chest. Every euro of interest earned on your frozen billions, and potentially the principal itself, will be used to arm the country you are trying to destroy. This turns the Kremlin's own financial prudence, accumulating vast reserves for a rainy day, into a strategic liability. The rainy day came, and now that umbrella is being used by someone else. But let's get concrete. How would this actually work on a technical level? The mechanics are as fascinating as they are complex. The roughly 210 billion euros in frozen Russian assets aren't sitting in a single giant vault marked Kremlins. They are scattered across various financial institutions, but a significant portion is held by the Euroclear settlement system in Belgium. These assets generate revenue. They pay out interest and dividends. One of the more immediate and less controversial proposals has been to simply confiscate these annual profits, which could amount to around 3 billion euros per year, and send that money directly to Ukraine. That's a significant figure on its own, enough to fund several military aid packages or rebuild critical infrastructure. But the new plan on the table is far more ambitious. It's about leveraging the entire frozen pot, not just skimming the interest. The leading idea involves the G7 nations, or a coalition of willing EU states, issuing bonds to raise the massive sum for Ukraine. These bonds would essentially be a loan from international investors to the coalition, which would then be passed to Ukraine as aid. The crucial part? The frozen Russian assets would be used as collateral for these bonds. This makes the bonds incredibly safe for investors, meaning they could be issued at a very low or even zero interest rate. It's a financial sleight of hand that unlocks the value of the frozen money without technically spending it. The principal remains frozen, a hostage for a future peace deal, but its financial power is unleashed today. For Ukraine, this structure is a game changer. It provides a predictable, large-scale, and long-term source of funding that isn't subject to the whims of political debates in the US Congress or various European parliaments. It gives them a financial runway measured in years, not months. However, this is where we encounter the first major legal landmine, the one most commentators are glossing over: the concept of countermeasures in international law. law. Proponents of the asset transfer argue that Russia's invasion was such a gross violation of international law that it justifies these extraordinary financial countermeasures. They say the world isn't stealing from Russia, it's merely ensuring Russia covers the costs of its own illegal actions. It's a form of collective self-defense, but with financial instruments. But the legal foundation is shaky. There is no international court that has ruled on this specific case. There is no UN Security Council resolution authorizing it. This is being done unilaterally by a group of states. This creates a massive legal uncertainty. Russia will undoubtedly sue in every available court, from national jurisdictions to international arbitration panels. They will tie this up in litigation for years, possibly decades. And this legal battle has a very specific, dangerous target: the financial intermediaries, the banks, the clearinghouses like Euroclear, the custodian institutions that are physically holding these assets. Their nightmare is just beginning. If they comply with a Belgian or EU order to hand over the assets or their profits, they immediately face lawsuits from Russia for breach of contract and violation of property rights. These institutions operate globally, and a ruling against them in one court could have catastrophic consequences for their operations in other parts of the world. The Western governments are trying to craft legal indemnities to shield these companies, but can they really offer complete protection from global legal fallout? It's a huge gamble. The entire plan relies on the smooth functioning of these private financial entities, and they are being placed directly in the crossfire of a geopolitical war. This leads us to the inevitable question of retaliation. The Kremlin has already labeled this planned move as theft, but their response will likely be more sophisticated and more damaging than just angry words. We should expect asymmetric retaliation. First, look for Russia to declare any Western assets still within its reach as forfeit. This could be the remaining stakes of Western companies that were frozen, or the few intellectual property rights still being respected. Second, and more dangerously, is the threat of cyber warfare aimed directly at the financial system. Imagine a coordinated attack on the very banks and settlement systems involved in this asset transfer. A major disruption of Euroclear or the SWIFT messaging system, even for a day, could trigger panic in global markets. The Kremlin could argue, you wanted to play with fire in the financial realm, now feel the heat. Third, they could further weaponize energy supplies or other critical resources, finding new ways to squeeze Europe and cause economic pain. This isn't just a financial decision, it's a decision that accepts a significant escalation in the wider hidden war being waged in cyberspace and the global economy. So, we have a plan of breathtaking scale, profound legal risks, and the certainty of fierce retaliation. Yet Western leaders are pushing ahead. Why? Because from their perspective, the cost of inaction is now greater than the cost of action. They see a Ukraine that is running out of money and ammunition. They see a Russia that is adapting to sanctions, finding ways to fund its war machine through third countries, and a shadow economy. The frozen assets represent the single largest, most potent untapped resource available to tilt the balance. It's a calculated risk. They are betting that the precedent-setting nature of this move will be a deterrent to other would-be aggressors like China, showing them that the financial cost of invasion will be absolute. They are betting that their own legal arguments will hold up, or at least that the litigation will be slow enough for Ukraine to benefit first. And they are betting that they can withstand whatever retaliation Moscow throws their way. It is the biggest financial gamble of the 21st century, and the stakes are nothing less than the future of Ukraine and the shape of global security. But what does this mean for the average person, for the global economy, and for the very definition of money and sovereignty? The answers are even more startling, and they point to a world that is about to become a lot more financially divided. To truly understand the seismic shift this represents, we need to pull the camera back from the immediate conflict and look at the global chessboard. What's happening with Russian assets isn't just a one-off policy for Ukraine. It's a live-fire test of a new economic weapon that could redefine how power is projected in the 21st century. For decades, the ultimate guarantee of a nation's financial security was its pile of foreign exchange reserves, preferably held in stable currencies like the dollar or the euro. Countries like China, Saudi Arabia, and others built up trillions in these reserves as a shield against economic turmoil. The unspoken contract was simple. You play by the rules of the global financial order, and your money is safe in our banks. That contract is now being torn up. The West is effectively announcing that this safety net has a condition. Don't launch major wars of conquest. This will send a chill through finance ministries from Beijing to Riyadh. They are now watching with intense scrutiny to see if this precedent holds. Their immediate unspoken question is, if it can happen to Russia, could it one day happen to us? This triggers what experts call de-risking on a monumental scale. We're already seeing the early tremors. Central banks around the world, particularly those with adversarial relationships with the West, are likely to accelerate a trend that was already underway, diversifying their reserves out of dollars and euros. They will move gold, they will buy commodities, they will invest in other currencies, and they will develop alternative financial messaging systems to SWIFT. This doesn't mean the dollar will collapse overnight. Its dominance is too deeply entrenched. But it does mean the unipolar financial world order, with the US Treasury and the European Central Bank at its center, is cracking. We are accelerating towards a fragmented, multipolar financial system where blocks of countries will keep their assets within their own spheres of influence. The cost of capital could rise globally as trust in the neutral custodianship of Western financial institutions erodes. The long-term consequence is a less stable, more volatile global economy where money is not just a tool of trade, but a potential weapon of war that can be turned against its owner. Now let's zoom back into the front lines in Ukraine. For President Zelensky and his government, this potential financial lifeline is about more than just buying more weapons, though that is critically important. This is about survival and leverage. The war has created a terrifying economic reality for Ukraine. Its GDP has shrunk dramatically. Millions of productive citizens are either fighting, displaced, or have fled the country. Critical infrastructure like power plants, ports, and railways have been systematically targeted for destruction. The government is spending almost everything it collects in taxes on the military, leaving little for everything else. They are utterly dependent on foreign aid to keep the lights on and the state functioning. This creates a precarious existence, living from one aid package to the next, always at the mercy of political debates in foreign capitals. A 140 billion euro loan, backed by Russian assets, changes that dynamic completely. It provides what economists call fiscal space. It means Ukraine can plan a multi-year defense strategy, they can sign long-term contracts for ammunition production, they can invest in developing and manufacturing their own advanced drones and missile systems, creating a self-sustaining military-industrial complex. They can begin the painstaking process of rebuilding critical infrastructure now, rather than waiting for a peace that may be years away. Rebuilding a power grid or a water treatment plant isn't something you do overnight. It requires years of planning and investment. This money would allow that to start, sending a powerful message to every Ukrainian citizen that their government is not just focused on survival, but is actively working towards a future, a normal life. This is crucial for morale, both on the front lines and for the civilians enduring constant hardship. But perhaps the most strategic impact is on the future of negotiations. Wars don't end on the battlefield alone. They end at the negotiating table, and at that table, the side with the stronger financial staying power and the clearer vision for the future holds a decisive advantage. This massive loan would place Ukraine in a position of unprecedented strength when and if talks with Russia begin. Kiev would not be coming to the table as a bankrupt, war-ravaged state desperate for a ceasefire at any cost. They would be arriving as a nation with a guaranteed multi-year financial plan for its own reconstruction and defense. They can negotiate from a position of confidence, knowing they have the resources to continue the fight if Russia's terms are unacceptable. It fundamentally alters the psychological balance of power. It tells Moscow that time is not on their side, that Ukraine's ability to resist will only grow, funded by Russia's own immobilized wealth. This brings us to the Kremlin's nightmare scenario, the psychological blow that this financial move delivers. For Putin's regime, this isn't just about the money, though the sum is staggering. It's about a profound humiliation. The Russian state prided itself on building up what they called a fortress of financial reserves, a shield to protect them from Western pressure. This move turns their fortress into their prison. The very wealth they accumulated to assert their sovereignty and power is now being used to fund their own strategic defeat. It's the ultimate form of financial jujitsu. Every missile Ukraine fires, every trench they dig, every hospital they rebuild could be seen as being paid for with Russian money. This is a narrative that the Kremlin cannot abide, and it explains the hysterical rhetoric coming from Moscow, branding the plan as banditry and theft. They are facing the prospect of not just losing the war, but of bankrolling the other side's victory. This is why the retaliation threat is so severe. The humiliation is so deep that the response may be designed to be disproportionately destructive, to show that Russia cannot be punished in this way without catastrophic consequences for everyone. And yet, despite all these strategic calculations and global implications, there is a ticking clock on this entire operation. The political will in the West is not infinite. We are already seeing signs of fatigue and political division in some NATO countries. Elections are looming, and populist movements skeptical of continued support for Ukraine are gaining traction. The architects of this asset plan know they are working against time. They need to get this structure up and running, and the money flowing to Kiev before the political window of opportunity slams shut. This is why the upcoming meetings in London and Brussels are so critical. They are not just another diplomatic summit. They are a race against time to lock in a financial mechanism that could determine the outcome of the war before Western politics potentially shifts in a less supportive direction. The coalition of the willing is trying to institutionalize its support for Ukraine, to make it automatic and detached from the day-to-day political winds. They are trying to build a financial autopilot for Ukrainian victory. But as we will see in the final part of this story, there is one enormous unresolved question that hangs over this entire audacious plan. A question that goes to the very heart of its long-term viability and could ultimately be its fatal flaw.